A great interview with a great guy, Dan Kelly. Definitely finger on the pulse of Canadian small business. He definitely is a friend to business and lobbying for all small business right across the country and trying to get or improve, I should say, the situation at all times. So, a great friend of our show, and we've had the pleasure of having Dan on our show many times. So, I thought we would now turn to the tariff uncertainty. And yes, the tariff uncertainty is growing. And I think a lot of that has to do with uh, President Trump and I guess changing his mind. I know originally he had said that the tariffs were not going to be changed, that they were not a negotiating tool. I know that his people from his administration came on media several times. Peter Navarro, Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, hinted at times that perhaps there could be a deal down the road. But the president himself said at one point that these tariffs were here to stay. But then 2, 3, 4 days later, president says, well, if you make me a good offer, perhaps there is some way to bargain. And now here we are, let's say a week or so, week and a half later, and I think it's over 75 countries have come to the U.S. to negotiate a new trade deal to hopefully remove the tariffs that have been placed on them. And these tariffs are so high. You know, you're talking just China alone, 145%, Vietnam in the 40% range, European Union, 20%, 25%. It's just been difficult for many countries, many areas like European Union to cope, and the uncertainty just continues. A lot of individual investors actually are talking about the uncertainty and what the effects of it. And really, what it does is it kind of just slow downs or even stops business. How can you continue to do business, as Dan Kelly said, when you don't know the rules? You know, you make adjustments to your business, and then come Monday morning, all of a sudden tariffs are removed, and those adjustments that you had to pay to accommodate the costs involved were for nothing because now the tariffs are not there. Or if you're a big business like GM or Ford, you spend billions and billions of dollars to build plants in the United States. It takes you 3 to 4 years. Well, guess what? In 3 to 4 years, there will be a new president in the United States. President Trump's term will be over. So will the new president have tariffs on like this current president does, or will he remove all tariffs and therefore businesses paid all these billions of dollars for nothing? So there's a lot of uncertainty there right now. It's the interesting thing, and I made mention in the interview with Dan Kelly, CNBC survey was showing that I believe the number is 57% of businesses are saying that they can't just come back to the United States because there's such a high cost. That's the big reason that there's a high cost of doing business. Labor costs are so high, and therefore they're forced to do business outside the U.S. And as I said, labor being the number one cost. So even if they're where they're at, countries being tariffed at a high rate, they may move to another country that is tariffed at a low rate or a lower rate rather than coming back to the U.S. So I'm not sure how successful the current administration will be in bringing back business to the United States. I'm not sure even if that's their number one goal. Is that their goal, or is their goal to raise revenue to offset perhaps the tax cuts that the United States is wanting to put through down the road? So tariff uncertainty continues. Our first chart clearly shows this. It is the U.S. Economic Policy Uncertainty Index. If you think you didn't have an index to show us the uncertainty, well, here it is. And you can see here the uncertainty has continued to climb with election day. It was sort of flat. Then the first new Trump tariffs went higher. Liberation Day, higher. Reciprocal tariff, Liberation Day, whatever you want to call it. I think that was an all-time for the uncertainty. Or maybe the uncertainty still is at all-time highs. Tough to say, because I think if you ask different businesses, they're going to tell you, we just don't know. Our next chart that we have, our next illustration here, it talks about how the uncertainty again continues to grow and its effects on the S&P 500. The S&P 500, there it is, market cap. Some of the words are maybe tough to make out, but what this chart shows you is the value of the S&P 500. So all the companies, all 500 companies, and what those companies are worth, their market capitalization. And you can clearly see from the Trump election, market cap of the S&P 500 went higher on the far left. Then the Trump inauguration in the middle, again, after he was inaugurated, went higher. And then as we started to move towards mid-Feb, towards the end of February, when those first tariffs were set to come on, Canada, Mexico, you could see what happened to the S&P 500 and the individual companies that trade. It was a pretty steep decline down. And then when you had the tariff unveil, that then you had reciprocal tariffs. Tariff unveil, I believe, is reciprocal tariffs. Look at that sharp decrease to the downside there. And then you had the Trump pause. When he paused for 90 days, that was pretty much at the bottom there. And we saw the S&P move higher. And lately, S&P has moved down once again based on one-off type of headlines that we've been receiving. Our next chart puts the tariff situation into perspective. And the big 2-day decline we had in the markets, where the markets lost, the Dow Jones lost a couple of thousand points just in one day. And you put that in perspective, and you see here that there's a chart on the trading range. And this shows you how crazy the trading range was on some of these days. And you have the first one was that Black Monday crash in 1987. Stock market was higher, and then it just collapsed. So that trading range was by far the biggest. Asian financial crisis, I think that's when the Russian ruble lost or devalued or lost its value. Not as big as the next three, which are the financial crisis in 08. And then you had obviously the pandemic in 20. And here you have Trump tariffs. So there has only been, I guess, 4 other times, other than the situation we're in now, where we saw trading ranges, so volatility as high as we saw when the reciprocal tariffs were announced. And that volatility continues today. I'll be a little bit less, but it is there. And last but not least, our last chart for this segment is the Volatility Index. So we talk about volatility, and there you have it. It actually crossed, the index crossed 50 points. And we hadn't seen that since COVID. And we know in COVID, everything just completely shut down. No one was going to work. Society, economy, everything was closed. And you could see that the market was equating COVID to current times. And we know, because we keep saying, oh, the market lost 2,000 points. That's the biggest one-day decline since March 2020, COVID. We've been saying that a lot lately. The declines in the market today, last time we saw this, were the declines in spring of 2020. We keep relating back to COVID times because that is when we saw declines of this magnitude. And I can tell you, businesses are still moving forward. There's still a lot of business being done, but it's definitely being slowed by the tariff uncertainty. And question, I think, on everyone's minds, will this uncertainty continue? How long will it continue for? Unfortunately, I don't think anybody knows, but until we start to get meaningful negotiations between countries, especially China and the US, I think the volatility will continue.